Any excuse. Sorry. The results, still not actually finalized until last month, were that the Republicans essentially got creamed. They lost the White House to Barack Obama. The size of the Democratic majority in the House went from 37 seats to 79 seats. And the truly shocking defeat was how badly the Republicans lost in the Senate. Republicans before the 2008 election had 49 seats in the Senate. In the 2008 election, they lost 8 of them. Not a single seat switched from Democratic to Republican. Not a single Democratic senator lost his or her seat. And 5 Republican incumbents were beaten by Democrats. The entire 2008 election was a disaster for the Republican Party. But for the Republican Party in the Senate, it was worse than disaster. They lost everything they tried for and then some. And that was even before Arlen Specter added insult to injury by flipping parties to the Democrats. Now, who was responsible for the Republican Party's fiasco in the Senate in the 2008 election? Who was in charge of the Republican Party's efforts to hold on to its seats in the Senate? Efforts that failed so epically? Hey, it was Senator John Ensign of Nevada. He was in charge of the National Republican Senatorial Committee for 2007 and 2008. That's the campaign arm of the Republican Party responsible for the Senate. While he was supposedly getting busy then overseeing the run-up to his party's 2008 shellacking in the Senate, you may recall that he was also getting busy with one of his staffers, putting her son on the NRSC payroll, finding jobs for her husband, and asking his own parents to give financial gifts, lots of them, to his mistress's family. That's a lot to do while you're trying to get folks elected to the U.S. Senate. I wonder if he's a good multitasker. Well, tonight there's new evidence that Senator Ensign was not the only one at the National Republican Senatorial Committee who might have been distracted by his extramarital affair while preparing for that ill-fated election. The Las Vegas Sun has obtained emails from the political director and the finance director of the NRSC. The emails are from their NRSC email accounts, and they are written to Senator Ensign's mistress and to her husband, and yes, are emails that refer obliquely but fairly obviously to the affair and to its fallout. These are emails that were sent while the National Republican Senatorial Committee was also employing Ensign's mistress's son. Back in March 2008, the NRSC started paying the teenaged son of Doug and Cynthia Hampton. They were paying him as a policy analyst. The month after that, Senator Ensign's parents gave the Hamptons $96,000 in gifts in April, and the elder Hamptons then left Senator Ensign's employ. The month after that, Doug Hampton, the husband of the couple, started working for November Inc. That's a consulting firm run by the political director of the NRSC. It's a man named Mike Slanker. Mr. Slanker telling the Associated Press this year that he had no knowledge of the affair between Ensign and Mrs. Hampton when he hired Mr. Hampton. The implication being that he found out when the rest of the world did, during Senator Ensign's June 16, 2009 public confession. But in July of 2008, nearly a year before then, Mike Slanker and his wife, who's also the finance director of the NRSC, were emailing with Doug and Cynthia Hampton about the affair. And that means, when you put it all together, that at least 3 people in the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Senator Ensign himself, the chair of the committee, plus the NRSC's political director, plus their finance director, all knew what was going on while they had Ensign's mistress's son on the NRSC payroll. Joining us now is the reporter who obtained these telling new emails, John Ralston, columnist for the Las Vegas Sun and the host of Face to Face with John Ralston. John, thanks very much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
What do these emails tell us about the Republican Party's role in the Ensign affair that we didn't know before?
Well, as you said, I think the implication was from Mike Slanker's original statement was that he didn't find out about this until June 16th when Ensign disclosed it. Now it's clear that he and his wife, 2 top officials of the Senatorial Committee, knew about it. Now, when exactly did they find out about it? Certainly before those July emails. And the question is, how distracting can that be when they find out that this has occurred and they have Doug Hampton essentially with their mothballed company in Las Vegas where they they've just handed him this sinecure, essentially, where he's trying to bring in clients but not doing that much. And they know that those emails that I obtained are freighted with all of this raw emotion. It had to be distracting for them. And imagine how they felt, Rachel, about their boss, John Ensign, having done this and then essentially thrown Doug Hampton to them to take care of.
What we know at that time, in terms of the way this timeline goes, as best as I understand it, that the political director and finance director of the NRSC at that time knew about the affair between Ensign and Mrs. Hampton, knew that Doug Hampton had been essentially recommended to them, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, by John Ensign for employ in their company that they worked out when they were not at the NRSC, and they knew that they had the teenage son of that couple on the payroll of the NRSC in some sort of policy role. Has the Republican Party ever explained why they had this teenager on the payroll?
Well, Mike Slanker, when I talked to him several weeks ago, Rachel, said he hired the Doug Hampton son as he would any other intern, that it was no big deal. But again, this revelation now, it raises all kinds of other questions. What Mike Slanker told me today when I confronted him with those emails is he never meant to mislead the media, but that he meant he didn't know about the affair when he hired Doug Hampton for November Inc. So that version of events, if true, and by the way, that comports with what Doug Hampton told me, that John Ensign's wife, listen to this, John Ensign's wife, Darlene Ensign, called Mike Slanker and said, do you know why, essentially, you were told to hire Doug Hampton? It's because of this affair. Think about how sordid and tawdry that is. And think about this, too, Rachel. This is the most important point, I think, that comes out of these emails. John Ensign was willing to sell his top finance and political person at the NRSC down the river to cover up this affair, to use them without telling them the full truth, to take on this man that he wanted out of his office, and he wanted to continue to pursue his wife. That's what those emails really reveal to me.
And this is all happening in the summer of 2008, leading up to the fall of 2008, when in the Senate, the Republican Party lost 8 seats, and John Ensign was the man in the Republican Party who had responsibility for overseeing the Republican Party's efforts in the Senate. Are you hearing from any Republican sources about dissatisfaction with his level of perhaps focus at the time?
Well, I think that's going to start happening. There were rumbles of that before, but now that when you see again those emails and how distracted obviously Mike and Lindsay Slanker, these two top officials, were at that time, we know Ensign was distracted. As you mentioned, Rachel, I thought of the same word. He must be the most marvelous multitasker in the history of multitaskers, with everything he was supposed to be doing, being a U.S. Senator, running the NRSC, and he's chasing this woman who doesn't even live in Washington anymore. How could he possibly have done a good job? Now, I think what really John Ensign should be worried about now is that this all starts to percolate up, and aren't just recriminations about his performance in 2008, but what about now? The Republicans don't need this. I think they hope that the last shoe had dropped in this. They don't want to keep hearing this drip, drip, drip of revelations about John Ensign. The question for him is how big will this bubble up inside that caucus where there's tremendous pressure for him to get out of the way so he's not a liability for them?
I would only add that the other question that now it needs to be answered, and that we have to watch for the timing on, I guess, is when the Republican Party will feel compelled to answer whether or not they were involved in actively covering up this affair or in paying hush money to this mistress's family in the form of a make-work job for her teenage son. We have continually tried to get a comment from the Republican Party on these issues. We'll keep it up, and we'll keep talking to you about your reporting on the subject, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rachel.
John Ralston is a columnist for the Las Vegas Sun, and he hosts a program called Face to Face with John Ralston.